Are you, like you're committed to this gay thing?
Yes.
All right.
I have been all over. If you saw my husband in a Speedo, you would be committed to the gay thing too.
I have, and I'm thinking about committing to the gay thing. I was surprised in reading in the book that you grew up a pretty devout Catholic, and in fact, when your mother passed away, you really started to reapproach that faith. I think a lot of people would think that was a weird thing for a guy who writes usually about anal prolapses.
Yeah, it was a little weird. It was weird even for me. My mother died in a horrible hospital in Tucson, Arizona, and there was just the last thing I did for her. Some people think I'm an enemy of people of faith, and I hate religion, and I hate people who are very religious. My mother was a very religious woman, but also very liberal and progressive, a progressive American Catholic. And the last thing I did for her was run through a hospital to find a priest to perform last rites. And something about, I describe Catholicism as a virus that can lay dormant in your body for so long that you forget that you were ever infected, and then it can come roaring back. And after that really traumatic experience, it kind of came roaring back, and I found myself slipping into churches, not because I was suddenly believing maybe that this Jesus person actually did jump out of his grave, and maybe Mary did float into the sky, but because I was sort of communing with my mother and feeling like this space I could tap into her spirit in a way. And I still slip into churches, but not during services. And I'm not going to confess. Could you imagine me going to confession? Forgive me, Father, it has been 28 years since my last confession. I hope you packed a lunch.
Yeah. Carol, could you hold his calls for the next 2 months?
And tell the altar boys they won't be needed until after dinner.
How do you
For Mass? Where are you people going with that? For Mass? Yeah. They use altar boys at Mass also?
How do you reconcile your appreciation for those parts of Catholicism and parts of faith in general when so many organized religions really reject your very existence as a human?
Part of me really enjoys describing myself as a Catholic, or culturally Catholic, just to drive actual Catholics around the bend. People like Brian Brown, the head of the National Organization for Marriage, who's a Catholic convert. And Catholic converts are the worst Catholics. They're always more Catholic than the Pope. And when they hear me on the radio or anywhere else say that I am Catholic, it just makes them blow a gasket, because they know what I'm blowing most of the time, and they don't think that somebody who's blowing what I'm blowing should be able to describe himself as a Catholic. So part of me calls myself a Catholic just to be a jerk, which is a Catholic thing to do.
But really, you're an atheagnostic or something?
An agnostitheist.
Okay.
Sort of a combo of an agnostic and an atheist. I am an atheist. I don't believe that there's anything or anyone out there scripting where tornadoes go and tsunamis. But I do cross myself on airplanes. And I pray when I'm flying, and then when I land, I don't thank anybody. So I'm an ingrate. I'm an ingrate and a hypocrite, because when the plane goes into the sky, I'm devout, and when it lands, I'm like, whatever, yeah. There is no God except when I'm at 30,000 feet, and then there is definitely a God, and he is protecting me.
You write in your new book that most of the emails, or at least the majority of the emails you field, are from straight couples who are in sexless marriages.
Many, many, many of those emails. It's depressing. The culture tells people that sex shouldn't matter, that sex is unimportant, that sex is trivial, all these other things should matter more. And what this leads people to do is get into committed relationships with people that they are not sexually compatible with for the long haul. And that's a real problem, because over the years, that becomes a bigger and bigger issue in a relationship. Basic fundamental sexual compatibility is important. So if you have a high libido and somebody else has a really low libido, you are not a match that is going to last forever, unless there's some accommodation, which is usually not granted in an opposite sex relationship, by which I mean some degree of openness or allowance, off-leash time. That's more controversial in straight relationships than gay ones. Not because gay men are gay men, but because gay men are men. When you look at the stats, Gay male couples are the least likely to be monogamous. They always say successfully monogamous. I say we're more likely to be successfully not monogamous. But gay couples are the least likely to be monogamous. Straight couples are more likely. Lesbian couples are the most likely to be successfully monogamous, which tells you something about men. That if you want to make marriage safe for monogamy, you need to ban males participating in this institution.
We should have talked like 2 weeks ago.
Sorry about that. You should have come to me for the premarital counseling. I would have turned to your wife and said, you got to marry a lesbian if you want. Find yourself a nice woman and settle down.
Right. In the traditional American fashion.
That's right.
You also write about some examples where you've actually gotten letters from people, or a letter that you cite, where you feel like cheating saved a relationship.
Absolutely. I am the only member of the sex advice industrial complex who will tell people that sometimes cheating is okay. And not only okay, but sometimes it can save a relationship, save a marriage. You know, when you say cheating is okay, people picture some sort of idyllic relationship, newlyweds or small children in the house, and I'm giving people permission to cheat and be dogs. And that's not true. The situations that invariably arise when you're talking the multi-decade course of a really long-term relationship, people have been together 25 years. They have teenagers or young children that they're still raising. And one person is done with sex. Maybe one person is disabled. Maybe one person is ill and just done with it. And the other person is literally going out of their minds or has been rejected sexually for 15 years, has not had sex with anybody for 15 years. And that person, and it can be a man or a woman, it's not always the man, but that person is ready to walk or cheat. And I look at that marriage and I say, okay, there's a shared history, there are children, you're good partners, you actually do still love each other. Maybe cheating is the least worst option. Maybe divorce is worse in that case than cheating, but the culture says you cannot cheat. You must abandon your spouse and children before you cheat. And sometimes I think cheating, of the lesser of two evils, is permissible. And there are times when cheating is absolutely, positively the right thing to do for your spouse. Just keep your mouth shut and be discreet.
Have you ever gotten, like, pulled into a room?
Somebody's cheering,
Yeah.
and,
We'll see you
and
guys
her
at the-
husband is looking at her like,
Yeah.
what the?
But on the other hand, we'll see you at the after party. You sound awesome. Did you ever, in your early days of writing Savage Love, get letters or emails or pulled aside by the Dear Abbeys of the world, the sort of advice cognoscenti, and they
And
told
scolded?
you? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, never pulled aside. We don't have conventions or anything, and advice columnists are all like vampires. We all hate each other. We don't get along. Like Prudy hates me, and I hate Prudy, and we all hate Carolyn Hacks, and Carolyn Hacks hates us. Because you always think you give better advice than anybody else, and anybody who wrote to them should have written to you. But there were times when I heard from people saying, you're doing this wrong. You're not allowed to say that. And I ignored them because I really don't care. When it comes right down to it.
You're listening to Livewire Radio. Our guest is Dan Savage.
Who
His new
really
book-
doesn't care. The secret to my success as an advice columnist is I just don't care.
His new book, which he cares, I would assume, to some degree, that you go check out, is American Savage, Insights, Slights, and Fights on Faith, Sex, Love, and Politics. Thank you for having the longest title in the history of books. It's the
pleasure,
last
thank
plug
you.
you're getting. Do you feel like the opinions that you've given or the advice you've given to people has evolved over the last 20 plus years?
Oh,
Based
yeah.
on your, because I've mentioned this to you before, but I grew up as a kid in Seattle reading Savage Love and just being scandalized by it. And now you and your husband started the It Gets Better project. I was reading this book. It's a well-written, very direct book that's not about a bunch of gross sex stuff. It's really, you've evolved as a person, right? Is that coming out in the kind of advice you're giving?
The gross sex stuff is still in my column.
Right.
I'm still talking to people who drink urine and want to put an arm
No,
in
I
their
said
butt.
gross sex stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we were in Portland.
Yeah. As long as
The bar is higher.
you ride a fixed skier bike to the orgy, you'll be okay in
And
Portland.
it's locally sourced urine.
That's right. That's exactly the point. No, but I mean,
Does this urine have a low carbon footprint? Before I drink it, I'd really like to know.
Do you look back on things that you wrote when you were a younger man, and as the Dan Savage of today, do you look back on it and think, I might have gotten that wrong?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I started writing the column when I was 26 years old, and I really didn't know my hole from an ass in the ground at that point. And there were things like, I actually begin a whole chapter. I have a giant chapter on bisexuality in the column. It's one example of something I really screwed up and got wrong for a long time, with assists from the sexual research that was out there. Sex researchers got it wrong too, and have only begun to get it right. But I begin that chapter with an example of something just so fundamental and basic that I got wrong, which is I didn't know where the clitoris was, which didn't prevent me from having an opinion about where the clitoris was. And I put it in the wrong place, not on the elbow or anything, in the general vicinity, but I thought it was at the top of the vaginal canal, like a joy buzzer or something. But that was not true. And now I know where the clitoris is, but I really put my foot in it. And that's how I found out where the clitoris is, by putting my foot in it.
Yeah. I could give you some advice on that whole end. You're doing that wrong if you're putting your foot on it.
If you're putting your foot in it, you're doing it wrong?
I mean, as far as, I don't know, is that something people write you letters about?
Yes, I've gotten letters from people who literally put their foot in it. And by it, I don't mean clitoris, I mean...
Right, the whole thing.
Yeah, other things.
Are there letters...
Footing is a thing.
Footing is a thing.
It is a thing.
To this day, do you still get emails that actually shock you?
Yes, absolutely. The most horrible ones used to be a million years ago, 22 years, pre-internet, pre-email, pre-digital photography. I would get emails from people saying, I have this sore on my genitals, and they would describe it and ask me what it was and what they should do. And they would always say in this letter, I'm too embarrassed to go to the doctor. And I would run one every once in a while to say, I don't know, I am not a doctor, and even if I knew, I couldn't print the column in penicillin this week for you to rub on your sore. You still have to go to the doctor, you've just delayed it. But now I don't get these long descriptions of the sore from people who are too embarrassed to go to the doctor. I get digital photographs, and it freaks me out. And it certainly freaks out the people sitting next to me on airplanes when I'm reading my email on airplanes and one pops up. That's an occupational hazard when you write the kind of column that I do. And I love that people are too embarrassed to go to the doctor, but not too embarrassed to stand on the sink in a dorm room bathroom and bend over and take a picture between their legs and send it out over an unsecure server to some jackass who writes a sex advice column for an opinion about what it might be.
Are you surprised that going from a guy who got his start writing about those sorts of topics, are you surprised at the impact that the It Gets Better campaign has actually had? Because I feel like that might really be a thing that helps more people in America when it relates to them understanding who they are and feeling okay about themselves than almost anything that's happened in the last 30 years.
Terry and I...
And I include most Indigo Girls albums, which was the previous frontrunner.
And the whole first season of Glee.
Yes.
Honestly, when Terry and I started the It Gets Better project, the goal, our fond hope was we would get 100 videos. Because we thought if we got 100, we'll get some of everybody. We'll get people of color, we'll get people of all different faiths and parts of the country and different experiences and economic classes. And there are now more than 100,000 videos from all over the world. There It Gets Better projects in Chile and Paraguay and Uruguay and Argentina and the United Kingdom and Australia and Vietnam. And you know, the goal though wasn't as many videos as possible. The goal was save lives, and the project has done that. We have heard from thousands of LGBT kids, their parents, emergency room nurses, crediting us and the project with making the difference, with getting them through a tough time. We haven't prevented every LGBT youth suicide. There have been others that break our hearts, and those get written about. The kids who don't kill themselves never get a newspaper story written about them. But they are out there, and you don't have to take my word for it. If you go and look at the videos on YouTube, you can look at the comment threads on each individual It Gets Better video, and you can see a kid that particular video resonated for and reached and touched, leaving comments, asking for help, asking for referrals, and getting responses from the creators of that particular individual It Gets Better video. You can see, reading those comment threads, lives being saved in real time. And that was what we want. If we got 10 videos and we saved a life, the project would have been a success. That there are 100,000 videos and it gets better projects popping up in countries all over the world, and so many LGBT kids have been helped and saved, it staggers me. And it's not Terry's backstage. It's not, we didn't do that. We made one video and asked other people to jump in and make videos too. The project has had the impact it's had and the reach it's had because of everyone who participated, everyone who shared their story and their advice and their perspective and how to make it better for all those LGBT kids out there. And we are constantly humbled and floored. NASA released an It Gets Better video this week. NASA. Astronauts talking to LGBT kids.
Are they letting gays in space?
Not like gays in space, but you know, I grew up watching I Dream of Jeannie. The idea that there would be an astronaut out there for me too kind of flabbergasts me.
Dan Savage, ladies and gentlemen, his new book is American Savage: Insights, Slights, and Fights on Faith, Sex, Love, and Politics.